All right, well, I think we can go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. Let's continue to the next slide. We appreciate you all taking the time to participate in this public webinar. We will present the draft final recommendations and implementation steps from the regulatory alignment study, which has been a multi-year effort in partnership with CDFA, CalEPA, and the water boards. Next slide. Before we begin, just a few quick reminders about the format of today's webinar. All participants are muted and video is turned off to reduce distractions. If you'd like to ask a question on webinar content, please use the Q&A function in your Zoom toolbar. You can submit questions at any time, and we'll do our best to address as many as possible at the end of the presentation. And finally, please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the study website. With that, I'll hand it over to CDFA Undersecretary Christy Birdsong.
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. We are excited to share the final draft of our regulatory alignment study. And I just want to start by thanking our study co-leads at CalEPA and the State Water Resources Control Board, whose staff worked many, many hours on this project, and you'll see it reflected in some of the great details of the report. And I also want to thank the Crow team and Blankenship and Associates who have supported this effort. When this work began in 2022, our goal was to answer a pretty important question, which is how can we better align California's food safety and water quality regulations to support agriculture, while also maintaining the strong protections that uphold public health and environmental integrity. This study seeks to answer that question, and it also builds on a long-standing vision. As early as 2010, the State Board of Food and Ag called for smarter regulation through better agency coordination. That vision was reaffirmed in the 2023 Ag Vision Plan and echoed again in recent executive actions from the governor, calling for a more effective, efficient, and human-centered public sector. So over the last 3 years, the Crow team has engaged deeply, conducting hundreds of conversations with producers, program staff, agency leadership, and stakeholders across the state. They listened very closely to what's working and what isn't. And what has emerged in the draft report are 18 recommendations that reflect what we've heard, which was, number one, the need for more transparency. Number two, streamlined reporting. And number three, there needs to be better coordination across agencies and programs. So I want to start by being very clear. These recommendations are not about lowering standards. They are about making our regulatory system work better for everyone. These recommendations emphasize transparency, efficiency, and effectiveness, while honoring the state's high bar for public health and environmental protections. Now, before I hand this back to the Crow team, I want to take a minute to sincerely thank the farmers and ranchers and advocates and the state employees who all contributed to this study. And I am asking you all, farmers and ranchers and advocates, to please stay involved. There's information at the end of the presentation on how to access the report and share your feedback. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to the Crow team. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Christy, and thanks everyone for attending today's webinar. We're really excited, and I'm really glad to see all of the participation this afternoon. I would like to echo Christy's gratitude to everyone who has supported the work and that has contributed to our work along the way. It's really been a collaborative effort throughout the last 3 years, and it's great, like as I mentioned, to see so many participants here today. For those that I haven't met yet, my name's Tommy Abeda. I'm a senior manager with Crow. I served as the project manager on this regulatory alignment study. In addition to that role, I lead the firm's Crow LLP program assessments, organizational assessments, and studies service offerings. Crow has a long-standing tradition of working in Sacramento, California. I'm joined today by our lead analyst, Jamie Hammond, who will also be presenting and providing details on the draft recommendations and solutions. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Jamie so she can introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name's Jamie Hammond. As Tommy mentioned, I'm a manager at Crow and serve as lead project analyst on the study. Again, just thank you all so much for joining this webinar, and thank you to everyone who's participated in the study throughout the past few years.
In terms of today's agenda, we will first cover and provide a background of the study. We'll also discuss its objectives. We will then provide an overview of Crow's approach to conduct the study. We'll give a high-level overview of the draft final recommendations and the implementation steps. In this webinar, we'll provide examples of the draft final recommendations, and then we'll conclude, as Christy mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, how to provide feedback to the Crow team so that we can incorporate your feedback into the final solutions report. And then last but not least, we will be taking questions related to Crow's work, and then answering any questions to the extent that we can. But our ask of you today is to review the report and then subsequently provide us either written feedback or schedule some time to meet with the Crow team to provide verbal feedback. In terms of the study background, in 2021, a working group identified a need to evaluate agricultural regulatory requirements in California. And then in 2022, CDFA contracted with Crow to conduct this study. For context, the regulatory alignment study was provided and funded by the 2022 Budget Act. And then over the last 3 years, CROA has engaged with various partners and interested parties across CDFA, CalEPA, and the water boards, along with extensive engagement with producers and other members of the public, such as advocacy groups, environmental justice groups as well. So very wide range of folks that we've engaged with throughout this process. Throughout this process and throughout the study, the folks that we've engaged with have really communicated some emerging and current pressures. Producers shared several pressures that make regulatory compliance a little bit more challenging. In terms of these challenges, these include some of the extreme weather events that have occurred throughout the state, such as droughts, floods, fires, and heat waves. Additionally, we've heard uncertainty around the labor markets in terms of availability and the costs associated with labor. Additionally, we've heard some input on higher interest rates and additionally production costs that often outpace commodity prices. While our study was not focused on the cost associated with the regulations themselves and these emerging pressures, we felt that it was important to acknowledge these pressures in the context of our study, which highlight really why streamlining regulatory administrative process is critical for not only agriculture itself, but for the public and then also program staff so that really the benefits and the outcomes of the regulations can meet their intent, which is to strengthen human health and environmental protections throughout the state. One thing we wanted to highlight were the study objectives. One thing to note is that these study objectives were confirmed and validated at the very beginning of our study, which started in 2022, as mentioned. In terms of the first objective, the team spent a lot of time reviewing the state's regulatory requirements within the areas of food safety and water quality for the agricultural community. Within this first phase, we identified not only the regulations themselves, but the various administrative processes that essentially are that underlie each one of these regulations, and then also we've identified how each of these regulations protect public health and the environment. The second objective, we conducted extensive listening sessions with to gather input from the agricultural community related to their experiences in terms of the reporting requirements, the administrative processes in these areas. In terms of the third objective, we brought together the ag community and regulators to review. It was a concept paper that we released last year. The concept paper mapped existing regulatory pathways, which provide conceptual proposals for food safety and water quality regulatory alignment opportunities. Those opportunities were intended to improve efficiency and information sharing. As part of task 4, we built on all of the prior tasks and we identified and prepared implementation plans regarding process improvements to streamline the reporting requirements. And then last but not least, we have provided these draft recommendations, which we will be giving you an overview of to CDFA, CalEPA, and the water boards for technological enhancements and process improvements to provide regulatory, administrative, and reporting efficiencies for the agricultural community. In terms of the scope of the study, the scope was really established at the very beginning of the study once we initiated it. So there were 4 key program areas. It's important to note that the winery order technically isn't a program area, but for discussion purposes, we'll just call these 4 program areas. The first and only program related to produce safety or food safety would be CDFA's Produce Safety Program, which implements the produce safety rule under the Food Safety Modernization Act through education, outreach, and inspections of approximately 20,000 produce farms throughout the state. The water quality programs include Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, which is administered by the water boards and regulates water discharges from approximately 6.5 million acres of irrigated farmland throughout regional waste discharge requirements. The second water quality related program that we evaluated was the Confined Animal Facilities Program, overseen by the water boards, which regulates manure and wastewater discharges from approximately 1,900 confined animal facilities. And then last but not least, we also evaluated the regulations within the winery order, which was adopted by the State Water Board in 2021 and is implemented by the regional water boards. This order is a statewide general WDR permit that sets tiered compliance requirements for an estimated 2,100 wineries with winery waste discharges to land. An important question to answer is, what is regulatory alignment? In the context of this study, it refers to the thoughtful coordination of processes and systems across the programs and scope and agencies so that the regulatory requirements are easier to understand, comply with, and administer. This includes clarifying roles, requirements, and timelines across programs, reducing duplication and data collection and reporting where feasible, improving communication and feedback loops between agencies and producers, coordinating use of systems, portals, and reporting formats, expanding support for producers of all sizes and operation types. In terms of our overall approach, this gives you a little bit of an illustration of the study objectives that I described and how they all came together, starting with evaluation of the regulatory requirements in Objective 1, all the way down to identifying technological enhancements in terms of Objective 5, and then in between conducting listening sessions, developing our initial proposals as part of Objective 3, and then identifying the process improvements in Objective 4. Again, altogether, these led to the solutions that we have developed within this draft report that is now posted on CDFA's website. We'll give you information on that after the webinar. But this is a synthesis of the draft final solutions for CDFA, CalEPA, and the Water Board's consideration. Again, as mentioned, when we were reviewing these various programs, really the 4 ones in scope, one of the key things that we were trying to look for was commonality across these 4 program areas. And so we analyzed and mapped over 80 distinct regulatory requirements across these program areas. And we found that there's generally 8 common regulatory processes across these programs. There's verification processes, there's enrollment processes. Some of the programs have an education component, such as the produce safety, irrigated lands regulatory program, and the winery order. There's monitoring and reporting requirements. There's inspection, enforcement, and evaluation processes. And so while this graphic, combines a lot of information, it's really important that we highlight the commonality, because within those commonalities, we were able to identify the solutions and some of the recommendations that we've identified within this draft report. In terms of our engagement, again, this was a 3-year study, and we have met with just so many folks throughout the last 3 years, starting with, interviews with subject matter experts. We've conducted public workshops to review some of our initial proposals. We conducted over 70 individual listening sessions to obtain, as mentioned, folks' direct experiences with the administrative and regulatory processes of these program areas. We reviewed 17 submissions of written feedback. That written feedback was submitted from interested parties that provided us feedback on the concept paper. As I mentioned, that was released last year and detailed our initial proposals. Additionally, over the last 3 years, we conducted over 40 interviews with agency staff, including 20 interviews with ag tech experts. And then finally, within our draft solutions report, which is now available on the study's website, we're really eager and excited for folks to review it. This report provides our final recommendations and implementation steps for CDFA, CalEPA, and water boards to consider. Again, it's important to note that this is still in draft mode, and we're opening up a 30-day comment period for folks to either, one, give us written feedback or set up some time with the CRO team to provide us their verbal feedback. It's important to note we did not evaluate whether the food safety or water quality regulations and scope of the study should be changed. We also focused on how these requirements, the regulatory and the administrative requirements are implemented, and how the regulatory processes and systems could be aligned to better support producers, state agencies, and the public. One commonality and key tenet that we found across just the last 3 years is the significance and criticality of data governance. And so across nearly every solution that we've identified within this draft report is the need for data governance, and it emerged as an enabler for regulatory alignment. So you might be asking, what does this mean in terms of the context of the study? Strong data governance, it ensures information is accurate, secure, and actionable to support transparency, protect proprietary information and data, and make smarter, streamlined regulation more possible for producers, agencies, and the public. So in terms of our draft final recommendations, again, these are draft. We've identified 18 recommendations. These are organized into 3 categories based on scope and complexity. These recommendations may likely require additional resources to implement. As a result, implementation will need to be phased, coordinated, and prioritized over time. And it's important to note the distinction between these recommendations. We really found that it's critical for CDFA, water boards, and CalEPA to consider these recommendations as building blocks, starting with foundational opportunities, which address short-term, lower complexity solutions that build momentum and cross-program consistency. In terms of the developmental opportunities, we see these as medium complexity solutions that enhance data sharing, reporting, and coordination across systems and regions. And then last but not least, we've identified a number of transformational opportunities, and these are kind of conceptual, big picture solutions that are structural. They support long-term modernization, such as unified approaches, shared identifiers, and integrated data systems. that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Jamie to give you an overview of the recommendations.
Thanks, Tommy. So again, starting with the foundational recommendations, within our report, we identify five foundational draft recommendations. Again, these are short-term, lower complexity solutions that can build early momentum. They're designed to strengthen coordination across agencies, expand access to technical assistance, and create consistency across programs. Advancing these first can show early progress to producers, agency staff, and the public, while also laying the groundwork for more complex solutions in the future. The next category includes 7 developmental recommendations. These are medium complexity solutions that build on foundational work from the foundational opportunities. They focus on improving data infrastructure, simplifying reporting processes, and supporting regional implementation through trusted partnerships. By advancing these, agencies can enhance how regulatory data is collected, shared, and used, while also creating tools to track outcomes over time. Finally, there are 6 transformational recommendations identified in the report. These are long-term aspirational solutions that require sustained coordination and vision. They include integrated systems, modernized data platforms, and approaches that can fundamentally reshape how California delivers smarter agricultural regulation. While these may take more time and investment, they hold the potential to transform regulatory alignment in ways that benefit producers, agencies, and the public. To support implementation, the report also identifies which agencies are best positioned to lead each recommendation. It highlights opportunities for CDFA, CalEPA, and the water boards to coordinate across programs, and it identifies recommendations that cut across multiple water quality programs. Importantly, many of these solutions will require additional staff and technical resources to be sustainable, which underscores the need for careful planning and phasing. So now I'll go through just some examples of these draft final recommendations presented in the report. Again, in total, we identify 18, and so we're just showing a subset of some of those today. So this first one is an example of a transformational recommendation for the Produce Safety Program. This recommendation suggests that CDFA, in partnership with the FDA, USDA, and the agricultural community, work together to continuously validate and recognize qualified third-party food safety audits as aligned with FSMA PSR requirements. In practice, this could mean that when a farm has already undergone a credible third-party food safety audit and passed, this could be recognized in PSP oversight. And really the intent is to reduce redundancy and inspection fatigue while maintaining strong protections for food safety. This next example is a developmental recommendation that would apply across Water Board's water quality programs. So it's a cross water quality program recommendation. It involves investing in enhancements to the GeoTracker system so that it can better support agricultural programs. This would modernize data management and reduce the need for manual submissions, aiming to make compliance easier for producers, oversight more efficient for agencies, while adding greater transparency for the public. Another developmental recommendation focuses on simplifying the irrigation and nitrogen management plan, or INMP, for small diversified farms under the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. For these growers, the challenge is that current requirements expect per crop nitrogen application and yield data, which may be difficult to provide accurately when managing multiple crops on small acreage. So while this recommendation highlights opportunities to streamline reporting, it will ultimately be up to each region to determine whether or how to apply any kind of simplified form. Additionally, the second agricultural expert panel will also be considering nitrogen reporting requirements. So this recommendation would need to align with their guidance and maintain flexibility for regional implementation. For the Confined Animal Facilities Program, one developmental recommendation is to implement electronic reporting. Currently, much of the reporting is done via email or PDF submissions. Transitioning to electronic forms could reduce workload for operators and staff, improve data quality, and support longer-term modernization of program systems. An important part of this recommendation is providing enough technical assistance to support the transition to electronic reporting and working with representative monitoring programs as needed to determine the best reporting formats, training approaches, and outreach strategies for producers of different sizes and technical capacities. Here we have a recommendation specific to the winery order. It's another developmental opportunity, and this one is to support industry efforts to establish water boards accepted sustainability programs. By accepting sustainability programs under the winery order, water boards can support ongoing industry initiatives while simplifying the compliance process for wineries. And participation in these accepted sustainability programs also provides fee reduction opportunities for wineries. And the last example we wanted to share is a foundational recommendation, and it's for establishing a small farm regulatory support liaison at CDFA. The liaison would provide small and socially disadvantaged farmers with a direct point of contact to help them navigate the various regulatory programs that they may be under. This role would improve communication between agencies and growers and ensure that the perspectives of small farms inform regulatory alignment efforts moving forward. Before finalizing the report, we are seeking your feedback, as Tommy mentioned. Written comments on the draft, final recommendations, and implementation steps can be submitted to the Regulatory Alignment Study team at regulatoryalignmentstudy@crow.com. We are asking for all written feedback to be submitted by 5 p.m. on October 15th, 2025. The CROW team is also available for additional meetings or discussions between now and October 15th. If you'd like to set up a time with us, just please reach out to us at the study email, and we look forward to receiving your feedback. And this concludes our formal presentation. We'd like to open the floor to any questions. Again, you can use the Q&A function in your Zoom toolbox to submit your questions, and we'll answer as many as time allows. And if we don't get to your question today or you have any follow-up input for us, just again, reach out to us at the Regulatory Alignment Study at crow.com.
So we did get one question on providing the slides, and yes, we can post these on the study website after this webinar.
And the recording of the webinar will also be posted to the study website as well.
We did get another question on does the study consider water quantity reporting, surface water rights, and groundwater reporting under SGMA? And to answer your question, no, we were focused on the ILRP reporting requirements, really the reporting requirements that are spelled out in the ESJ order. Any other questions?
See a question on the URL for the study website and when will the draft be posted. So we can actually drop in the chat. The report has been posted to the website. So I'll send that over into the chat. Hopefully you have access to that. And I can also send the link for the study, just the general study website.
So one question we did get was on, will you provide an example of streamlining? I think a really good example would be the example recommendation that Jamie had described specifically on simplification of the INMP report where feasible. And so that's an example of streamlining. We'll spell out all the details. There's a little bit of nuance and a little bit of kind of the criteria of simplification, but really that's an example of streamlining simplification of the form while still meeting the intent of the reporting requirement itself.
I see.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jamie.
Oh, I was going to say, I see another question on the study design, if it was designed to help the agricultural sector or the general public.
Do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I can answer that one. So our study goals, we lay these out kind of at the beginning of the report and within the study website, so you can kind of view the exact language there. But we have three goals, and those are to streamline the regulatory requirements for the agricultural community, while also optimizing the state's data collection efforts. So, wanting to kind of benefit or help, as you use the term, the agricultural community, but also the state and their administration of these regulatory programs, as well as strengthening the public health and environmental protections for the general public. So we did try to take this balanced approach for identifying recommendations that really hit on benefits for all three of those groups.
Jamie and Tommy, I just want to note that I see questions both in kind of the question window and in the chat. I don't know if you're watching both of those.
Yeah, we're getting questions in both, so we'll kind of toggle between both of them. So there's some questions that came in on GeoChacker. I think maybe Jamie, if you want to go through those, because I think a lot of these are could be probably addressed in together.
Yeah, so GeoTracker is a technology used it collects groundwater monitoring data primarily. It's operated by water boards, and so I think you're referring specifically to our recommendation around enhancing um, the GeoTracker system. And so we spell out specific kind of items related to what those enhancements could be within the report. So I would definitely refer you to the report for that specific information.
So it says that does the enhancement include easy data query and download by members of the public? And to answer your question, yes, really our objective was to, as Jamie mentioned, for all the recommendations to meet the study's goal, which is to essentially optimize the data that is collected by the state while also empowering those that must comply with the various regulations. And so by submitting data through GeoChacker that has the investments, it makes it easier for them to submit the data, which then potentially makes it more available, more queryable for those of the public, key data that is selected, not necessarily all data. And then there's a question on, is there a potential to pinpoint with GeoChacker actual sources of pathogens that can narrow the focus of efforts at contamination potential rather than casting the wide net that current food safety requirements seem to promote? There are, Brianna, I don't know if you're on, if we can if you can answer that question, or if someone else from the project team might want to tackle that one.
Can you point me to which question you were?
Yeah, sorry, we're
I
getting
was
a lot of
looking up
questions.
the link for GeoTracker because I thought that might be helpful. Sorry.
Yeah, it's the one second from the bottom within the question and answers.
About pathogens?
Correct. Yep.
So I think this question, and maybe we can follow up with the person who asked the question, because I think the person who asked the question was thinking about geo-tracking versus the water board's geo-tracker system.
Okay.
And so maybe if that person who asked the question can do a follow-up, and again, I can provide a link to the water board's geo-tracker system to help clarify and provide more information on the system that the water board uses to collect that groundwater data.
There's a question on, and this might be a question that Crow can take a stab at, but definitely may want to have CDFA or water boards to opine on. What have CDFA, CalEPA, and the water boards committed to as far as how they plan to address or act on the recommendations from the report? I can't answer that question, but I can say that these are recommendations for consideration. There's a public comment period that's starting today, which will be the draft report is made public. So we're looking for folks to provide input so that we can finalize the report and then hand it back over to CDFA, CalEPA, and water boards for their review and consideration for implementation.
Yeah, I would just add from CDFA's perspective, we're still kind of in the report drafting mode, and all of stakeholders' feedback will be really, really important in terms of helping us to prioritize and kind of look for the best path forward that's going to have the biggest impact for farmers and ranchers to comply with regulations. And of course, I don't need to tell anybody that a lot of these solutions do depend on revenue from the state. They have a price tag attached to them, and that's kind of a different strategy, different conversation that we would have to approach after the report is final. But we're very pleased. We've got actionable recommendations so far, and again, kind of having this tiered system is very helpful to look at the low-hanging fruit that we can accomplish now and what we can plan for in the future.
Thanks, Christy. Looks like there's some other questions that came into the chat. One is, can you give examples of who the SMEs you interviewed with? Have you interviewed with growers for input? We provide a comprehensive list of the groups that we met with, and you can find those within the draft report now available on the study's website. So that should give you an indication of the folks that we interviewed and provided input. There is a question on anything to address double reporting. To answer your question, yes, I would say first take some time to digest and read through our solutions. One thing that is critical to point out is there are a lot of moving components right now with some of the programs that we evaluated, and so we had to be mindful of some of those moving parts. So in terms of your question, I would definitely take some time to review how we explain some of that in the report without getting too bogged down on the details. But to answer your question, yes. One question was, should the efforts of regulatory alignment before the PSP has been enacted, is it too late? I don't know if Geetika or Christy wants to take that one. The question is, should the efforts of regulatory alignment before the PSP has been enacted, is it too late?
Yeah, I think I would have to defer to Geetika on that. Oh, hi, Geetika. Thanks.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, folks. So I would start by saying that, this project took a few years to complete, and as we were meeting with the CROW team and trying to develop recommendations, things evolved even at the program front through that 2 or 3 year time frame. So one example to share is that, when we started this particular discussion, one of our challenges has been our farm inventory data and collecting that data, storing it, but also kind of streamlining it through a database where we could risk prioritize. And so we made parallel efforts to pursue funding through the California Technology Modernization Fund. And we have been able to implement a database simultaneously as the study is coming into conclusion. So there were, instances like this where even at the beginning of the study, what we were identifying as needs, there were some things that kind of were being addressed along the way as well. Um, so once you see the full report, you might see flavors of that reflected through the report as well as the CRO team has tried to capture. So many times we had to pivot. Now some of the draft recommendations look like how to better align other pieces of information now with this database that we've developed, right? Rather than going back to the drawing board and saying, oh, we need a database. So that, I would offer that up as an example, but that's exactly also the type of things we're looking for. Some input, maybe it's also going to help us understand what type of recommendations would take most priority or would be most impactful to all of you as part of the stakeholder group. To further make some prioritization. So I'll stop there and see if Christy, if you would like to add anything to that, maybe more big picture, or if Jamie or Tommy want to add anything from the CRO perspective.
Thanks, Geetika. I think you covered it very well.
Second that. I don't think we have anything to add. There's some other questions that came in. One is, in your review, did your team identify any regulatory requirements or elements that were at odds or contradictory across programs? For example, ILRP erosion control with vegetation could be at odds with bare dirt for food safety purposes. If so, what were your findings? So this is a really good question. And one thing I want folks on the call to know, and I think most get this, is, our scope was statewide, and there are regional differences in terms of how the programs are, especially the water quality programs, are implemented. And there's different growing practices across the state. Each farm has their own unique practices and operations, et cetera. So to answer your question, yes. And so you'll find some case studies and examples that we highlight throughout the report that really spells out kind of these experiences that the various growers and other folks in the community as they experience these programs. And so we did identify a handful of recommendations that would address this issue of potential overlap and or requirements that may conflict with one another. The first would be identifying and recruiting a regulatory liaison at CDFA that could address something like this, where they would interact with regulatory agencies to work with growers to address some of the regulations that may conflict and figure out solutions to identify them without having to change either the regulations or any of the administrative or reporting processes. Additionally, we've identified other recommendations that would really support coordination and communication of the regulations themselves. And so working with programs across both CDFA and water boards, not just the ones in scope, so they can share information with farmers so that they can then, once they share the information, gather that information once they're out in the field, and then be able to communicate some of this feedback upwards so that they can, these issues could be addressed. So that was very long-winded, but I think it's important, while we went through this process of identifying these solutions, which, for lack of a better word, are pretty comprehensive. But at the same time, it's just important to note just the complexity and the diversity of the state's agricultural system. And that's just an important finding and something that, we really considered throughout the process in the course of this study. So there's a question on for all the programs who have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on our own data management systems that are not GeoTracker, how will that be incorporated and acknowledged into the recommendation about GeoTracker? I believe that's a really good question. I do believe that we do acknowledge that. Um, again, I don't want to be uh, I would say let's talk offline. First, review the recommendations themselves, and then provide either written feedback or verbal feedback. Because we do acknowledge that the state does, not just the state, but third parties, coalitions, et cetera, have done a lot of work in investing in solutions to support compliance. In that, really optimizing those available systems, optimizing the available data. That was really our focus, is how can we build on all of these successes and all of the wins that a lot of you on the call have implemented. And so to answer your question, we acknowledge it, and it is in our report. And if you do have additional feedback on how we could elevate or incorporate then this notion further, feel free to provide us that input. Any other questions?
I do see one other question in the Q&A, Tommy, and maybe this is more for Geetica's team, but it says, I imagine that I was thinking of a genetic tracking technology that could be more definitive at determining specific sources of microbial contaminants so that producers can be more knowledgeably focus their prevention efforts rather than having to try prevention of all conceivable sources regardless of risk potential. Does such technology exist?
Yeah, this is a really great question. The short answer is that yes, the technologies do exist, most notably whole genome sequencing, but they do require quite a lot of resources and efforts, right? So before a sample could be run through a whole genome sequence, it would require quite an extensive effort of swabbing and collecting samples from lots of different produce, like food contact surfaces that might be important on a particular type of farm, depending on what commodity they grow and what kind of activities they conduct. So currently, the produce safety rule, the federal produce safety rule, has been designed as a preventative approach, also because of recognizing that farms of all sizes may not actually have the capacity to do this type of large scale sampling. The other challenge is, despite having money and the technology, farms are an open environment. So collecting the right number of samples that could be considered as representative every single time can be quite the challenge. That is something we have experienced when we work with our federal partners when they conduct outbreak investigations as a result of foodborne illness outbreaks. Those sometimes involve these type of like large scale sampling and sequencing efforts to identify root cause. And it can be challenging still to connect those microbial sequences and identity to the exact source, just because of farms being such a vast open environment, which is not a controlled environment, unlike a food processing facility. So for those reasons, it's not been considered as an adequate practice as part of a produce safety inspection, for instance, because the expertise and details that would go to really demonstrate that the sampling was adequate. And in a nutshell, when you find something, that's a great evidence. But when you don't find something, it's very, very hard to prove that there wasn't something missing in the sampling effort or any of the other upstream steps of that genetic sequencing. So for those reasons, it actually remains a challenge from an inspection perspective on how to validate those type of results. So I hope I've tried to answer the question, not gotten too much into the weeds. I'm happy to take a follow-up on that to break it down a little bit more if needed. Thank you.
There's a question on, do you have an estimated or an estimate of the cost of implementing the recommendations and the potential benefits? We do have estimates for some of them, not all of them, given that, really, the way that they're framed in the report, really spell out kind of what's needed, not necessarily in terms of dollars, but really key, participants, et cetera. And we do also spell out the benefits and really, again, kind of, not to be repetitive, but really the benefits really revolve around kind of the tenets of the study or the goals of the study, which is to optimize the data that's collected by the state, strengthen environmental and human health protections, and then also empowering farmers and ranchers that must comply with the various regulations and scope of the study. Any other questions? Looks like there's one question in terms of, yes, we are advocating for the report. There's a lot of information in the report. So the question is, will there be a follow-up webinar after we get a chance to do so? Crow will work with CDFA, CalEPA, and water boards to first really evaluate all the feedback that we get. We understand that this is a collaborative process, and so yes, we are advocating and would love for everybody to go read the report because there is a lot of details in the report. As mentioned, this is a statewide effort, and so really was we took a lot of care to make sure that those details were considered in terms of the nuances, the regional flexibility, the various size of farms, and what the solutions and what the recommendations really mean to everybody. So yes, this webinar really is kind of an ask. Please go read the report. There's an executive summary. It's 8 pages that highlights the key components of the report, but then subsequently there are details for those policy folks that really want to get into the weeds. So to answer your question, yes, please go read the report. There will be a follow-up, but we'll be relaying that information with you all in coordination with CDFA, CalEPA, and water boards. For context, our study will conclude in November, so you should be hearing something back from us in soon, really after the 30-day comment period. Hopefully that answered your question. I'm wondering if we can bring up the slide real quick, just the one that has the information on how to provide feedback, just so folks can, I know we provided it before, but let's just maybe leave folks with that information. Jamie, do you want to maybe wrap us up? We're kind of at that point.
Yeah, just thank you all again for joining today's webinar and your continued engagement throughout this process. Really, your input is essential for making the final recommendations. practicable and inclusive. So don't hesitate to reach out to us directly at regulatoryalignmentstudy@crow.com. Again, we're happy to set up additional calls or discussions as needed throughout that period. And we'll be accepting all written feedback until October 15th at 5 p.m. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.